I am so excited about our speaker today. I have had the pleasure of having a couple of conversations with him before this, and I find him inspiring as a writer, and I'm excited for you to hear the things that he has to tell us. His bio on his website's where I'm going to take the information to intro him today. You can Google him and he comes right up. He's Google famous at least. Timothy Lewis is author of the best-selling novel Forever Friday, which was translated into multiple languages and featured in Reader's Digest select editions. He's only the second Reader's Digest author of an inspirational crossover title in over 25 years. Wow. Reviewers on BookBub, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, and Amazon compared his poetic prose to Nicholas Sparks. In an article for USA Today, a literary editor likened Tim to Garrison Keillor. As a published playwright, Tim's penned more than 20 plays or musicals and over 100 songs. His article, Freighting on the XIT Ranch of Texas, was published in the Panhandle Plains Historical Review. Committed to help fellow writers, he co-founded the West Texas Writers Academy, some of you may have attended that, held annually at West Texas A&M University until recently. Mr. Lewis holds a bachelor's degree of music education from Sam Houston State University and studied master's level playwriting at the University of Texas. Moreover, he's a graduate of the Institute of Children's Literature and a cowboy poet. Tim and his wife Dinah live happily ever after atop the beautiful high plains of Texas. What he's working on right now is he's in the process of writing another dual period love story, much like Forever Friday, plus a contemporary love story that includes country music, and he'll post those on his website as soon as he releases them. He's also got some other exciting things in the work that he's going to share with us. So help me welcome Tim Lewis.
Thank you very much. I'm going to use my stage voice today. I used to have a stage voice. I'll try to get it out to you since I don't have a mic. So if you have trouble hearing me, raise your hand and let me know. And I have to say that thank you for the beautiful introduction, even though I wrote it.
Good job.
Anything that goes on your website, you write or your web designer writes. And people say, well, are you famous? And I say, well, have you been to the post office lately and seen my picture up on the wall? But that's a 30-year-old joke. You may not understand it. But, it's all relative. We're all really in the same place. And I just consider myself a writer, and I still struggle as you do. And, what is the big time? I mean, do you ever really make it or not? And so there's places along the way. So I'm going to talk today about that. But before I do that, two things. I met a couple of children's book writers in the back, an author and an illustrator. And y'all come all the time, or is this your first time?
No, we've come.
Okay. So my wife and I recently, there was the funniest YouTube video. Don't look it up now. But it's about a children's book called The Wonky Donkey. Has anybody heard of that book? Have you seen the video of the Scottish grandma reading it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the funniest things. We laughed for hours when we watched that. And so we got Wonky Donkey T-shirts. And so we wear Wonky Donkey T-shirts around, and people think we're nuts. But that's what books do. Books give us joy. And a lot of joy. And I'm going to talk about that some today. So before I get started, just a quick show of hands so I can kind of see who I'm talking to today. How many people write books? Doesn't matter if it's children's, nonfiction, okay, most everybody. Any screenwriters here today? Okay, I know just enough screenwriting to be dangerous. What about poets? Okay. I've written a few poems. What about music? Anybody write music? Okay. I've done most of those things. And so screenwriting is the least, although I think it is so fascinating how all of a sudden you don't use words to tell the story, you use pictures. And that's so fascinating to me. And how in a novel, I mean, the rule that the rule of thumb is that see if I can get this right. You probably know it better than I do. A page in a screenplay equals a minute on film. Is that right? Okay. Now, a page in a screenplay is about half of what a page of a novel is. So if you have a 350-page novel, you're not even putting half of those words in the screenplay. So that's why so much of it is done with pictures. And you can take a whole chapter or maybe 5 pages, 10 pages in a book where you're describing the scene, especially if you write very literary, and you can do that in that long with film. So it's really fascinating to me, but like I say, I've done enough of it just to be dangerous. Okay, so I am going to talk to you today about, I hope to inspire you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey, and I want to open with this poem. So, there was a crooked man and he walked a crooked mile. He found a crooked sixpence against a crooked stile. He bought a crooked cat which caught a crooked mouse, and they all lived together in a little crooked house. Wouldn't you love to be Mother Goose and have her royalties? I did a little research on Mother Goose, and we all know Mother Goose is a collection of stories and poems and all kinds of things that are centuries old. And back in 1700s, a lady in Boston claimed to be Mother Goose, and then later it was proven she wasn't. So you can believe what you want. But I thought this was the perfect poem for my title, Creating from the Crooked Road, and I mean crooked in a good sense, not the post office posters. Or I could call this to zig or to zag. So if anybody's confused and you're a word nerd like me, here's the definition. Zig is to execute a zig, usually contrasted with a zag. Wow, that's clear, isn't it? I got this out of Webster. Zag is to execute a zag, usually contrasted with a zig. That's very clear, isn't it? So I got this title, The Twists and Turns of Writing from Your Own Experience. And the best way I can tell you that is to talk about my journey. So that's what I'm going to do. I went to college way back in the 1970s. That kind of gives away how old I am. And I started at Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas, about 100 miles north of Houston. And I was an ag major. And I wanted to farm or ranch. I love being outside. I love being on a tractor. And that's what I thought I wanted to do. And I kept switching my major from agronomy, which is crop science, to animal science, because I thought, well, maybe I want to be a veterinarian. So while I was battling that, I went to church like all good college boys do. And my wife swears that I went to church to meet girls. That's probably true too. But I did in the college department there at First Baptist Church in Huntsville, Texas. It was a big college department. And I met a woman who had a real impact on my life, and her name was Helen Bass. And she had written a play published by Broadman Press called The Encounter. And it was a two-people play, a man and a woman. And she asked me one Sunday after class, she said, I want you to be in my play with me. Let's go around and do it for some churches. And I said, I'm not an actor. And she said, well, haven't you done some acting? And I said, well, yeah. I was Peter Rabbit in the first grade. and I thought that I was being punished by the drama teacher because she gave me the role of a bad rabbit. Who ate Mr. McGregor's stuff in his garden. I didn't know I had the lead. And so finally I figured that out, and fifth grade rolls around, and we do Jack and the Beanstalk. And I thought, I'm going to get the lead this time. Well, here's what I got. I was a big, sturdy guy, even as a fifth grader. And so I played the bottom of the beanstalk and the back end of Jack's cow. Truly. So that was my part in Jack and the Beanstalk. Well, the sixth grade came along, and we did Cinderella. And by that time, I thought, well, what are my chances of getting anything? And I landed a role as the town crier. Now, town crier was a pretty cool role. I was in the chorus, and I got to have a few lines. I got to sing some songs. But when you're 11 years old and they call you the town crier, yeah, you can imagine what the other guys did to me. So that was my experience in acting. But I said, okay, look, I'll be in it with you. So I was in the encounter with Helen. It was a big success. And so we got through. We took it around for a couple of months, and maybe 3 months. And she said, now I want to write a musical play, and I want you to write the music. And I just laughed out loud. I said, I don't write music. She said, you play the piano, don't you? I said, well, a little bit. Well, you can write music. I said, look, I'll go home over the Christmas holidays and I'll see if I can write a song. If I can, I'll attempt to write the score for this musical. So I went home over Christmas and I wrote a song called People Don't You Know. And that was the name of the show, that was the title song, and I wrote 10 more songs as well to go with it. And so we did this musical there with what we call the University Chorus, and we loaded up an old school bus full of college students, and we traveled all over Texas and New Mexico and Oklahoma and did this musical in different venues, mostly churches, but sometimes we did it outside. And it was a lot of fun doing that. And I've learned through the years that you have to look back on the things that are funny sometimes when you're down to kind of lift you up. And so we were doing a show one night at a little church in East Texas, this show, and there was a lot of stuff we did about the light and the darkness, a lot of imagery went on with the light and the darkness. And so, you know, it was in the summer, we did this tour, and so it gets dark late in the summer. And so it was still light, you know, at 7 o'clock when we started the show. So we would take big sheets of plastic and black out the windows of these churches. They actually let us do this, just cover them up. And so it would be dark for the play. Well, we were somewhere in East Texas one night, and right when it came to the pivotal part of the play where the light comes on, one of the pieces of black plastic fell down from the window and the sunlight streamed in right on the main character. It couldn't have been more perfect. And the guy came up to me after the show and he said, where did you get that time release tape? So you learn to, you take these good things, and I encourage you to do that. Take the good things, remember them, and keep them in your heart. Ellen and I next did a Broadway type musical. This was 2 hours long, about Nicodemus. Some of you may know the story about Nicodemus in the Bible, but it was about his life. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, and he went to see Jesus at night, and they all thought he was crazy. And so I have two funny stories that I want to share. So there was a member of the Sanhedrin who thought Jesus was crazy, or Nicodemus was crazy. And the line this man was supposed to say was, Nicodemus, you have lost everything you know. That's the line. He said it great during rehearsal. He said it great during dress rehearsal. Here's how he said it on opening night. Nicodemus, and remember this is in biblical times, Nicodemus, you have lost everything, you know? So I learned right there, you can't trust characters. How many of you found out that characters take a life of their own? Yes. Why does that happen? But it does. One more story about that. So, same play. There's the high priest at the time of Jesus was named Caiaphas. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. And there's a story, you may remember this in the Easter story, where he says that Jesus spoke blasphemy, and he's so upset he rips his robe. So we had this robe that was Velcroed, so Caiaphas could rip it every night of the show, So he did it on dress rehearsal. We had 2 dress rehearsals. First one, great. Second one, great. Third dress rehearsal came along, and I guess it had gotten cold during the night before because he ripped his robe, and underneath he had on a T-shirt that said Huntsville School of Karate. So you never know what characters are going to do. So there I am back in my college days. I had the fro and mustache, or sorry fro. That's Helen, and this came out in the local paper, and we really thought we were going to be the next Rogers and Hammerstein, and that's what I wanted to be. I read books on Rogers and Hammerstein. I studied the scores that Richard Rogers wrote, and she wrote the words, I wrote the music, and I thought that was how it was going to turn out. We did another show after that where we loaded the bus up again with college students, and this was called The Pain Game. It was a musical about love, and this pain is spelled correctly there, and we took that all over. And again, I thought, I'm in the right place. This is what I'm going to do. But what this musical taught me, I didn't know it, was I was going to end up writing love stories. I didn't know that then, but this was kind of planting the seed for that. I did finally graduate, and I had to teach school because I had changed my major, I tell you this, from agriculture to music my senior year. There's not a lot that transfers over. So I like to say, I squeezed 4 years of college into 10. And it wasn't quite that long, but I did teach school, got married. I'll show you a picture of my wife in a minute. But I taught music and math and social studies. I kept on writing though, and I wanted to write. I was interested in the prophecy in Isaiah, and I wanted to write a play, historical fiction about, when Jesus was crucified, what was going on back at the Bethlehem Inn. That would be an interesting story. And so I wrote that. That was my first published work. It was published by Merriweather Publishing, and then years later, when we moved to Canyon, the Methodist church there did it. And I didn't even know it. Somebody called me one day and said, "Did you write a play?" Well, they're doing it at the Methodist church. And that's the playbill from that. And then it came out as an anthology, and this was published all over the world. Now, in English-speaking countries. Now, I was pretty pumped about that. But if you look right here, what does that say? Royalty free. What does that mean? That means I don't make a dime, right? So I didn't. But learn this from me if you learn anything today. Be willing to let your work be out there and not make a dime if it's getting your name out there. Be careful about putting anything on the internet, because once you do, it can be gone. And that's happened. That hasn't happened to me. I've been real careful about that, but I know lots of writers that's happened to. And if we have time in the questions, I even submitted to an agent one time, and she turned my work down, and a year later, a guy came out with a book that was very similar to mine. I'll tell you more about that if we get time. This is my wife, Dinah. Now, this is 42 years ago when we got married, and by this time, I wasn't teaching school anymore. I was offered a job in a church as director of education. I took it. It paid double what I was making teaching school. And so she's a nurse, but she dropped out of nursing for a couple of years because we wanted to have a child, and she became my secretary. And it's great when your wife is your secretary because she can sit in your lap and, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I continued to write while I was working at the church.
15 minutes.
I thought I had an hour.
You do. You just asked me to write.
Oh, after 15 minutes passed.
15 minutes has passed.
Yeah, I mean, when I had 15
From an hour.
minutes left.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Wow. Tell me when I got 15 minutes.
You're good.
Okay. I continued to write, and I grew up in Lancaster, Texas, which is the home of the quarter horse that is considered the grandfather of the modern American quarter horse. His name was Steel Dust. And if you go to the American Quarter Horse Association, you can see his statue out there. I actually sat on a tractor and plowed the ground where Steel Dust had raced there in Dallas County. So I knew a lot about him. I knew a lot about the family. So I wrote a children's musical about Steel Dust. Now I was writing on my own. And it wasn't published per se, but it was done all over the state and in other places. And this is actually a group in Huntsville doing it at one of the schools in 1985. So I was real proud of that work, and that work will come back. I'll talk about it more in a minute. In 1986 was the Texas Sesquicentennial. How many of you remember that? Texas was 150 years old. Some of you weren't even born yet. But Texas was 150 years old, and so the celebration, the main celebration, was at the San Jacinto battlefield down near Houston, and the Texas governor was there, and lots of dignitaries. And I teamed up with another lady I knew who was a writer, and we wrote this show about Sam Houston's boyhood called Snips and Snell's Hero Tale. And it was a hit, and we were written up in the Houston Post. And I thought, man, I've really made it. I'm going to do this thing as a playwright. Meanwhile, my hometown newspaper wrote an article about me. And I want to tell you, if your hometown paper ever wants to write an article about you, let them. Don't chicken out. If you're worried about doing an interview, read other interviews, see how people do it. But just tell your story. But then also double check and make sure they get the information right. I can't tell you how many times I've been misquoted. And if they'll let you check it, go ahead and check it. The church work gig lasted about 5 years, and the preacher I was working with moved on, and I knew that without a seminary degree, I wasn't really very hot property, and I needed to do something else. And so I told my wife one day, I want to go back to school and do graduate work and study playwriting. And the University of Texas had a really good playwriting program. And so I went there. Our daughter, we had a child by this time, she was 2. And we only had one car. We were so poor, and we lived several blocks from campus. And my wife Dinah took the car to work every day. And I took care of our child, and I put her in one of those baby backpacks and took her to Mother's Day out or wherever we were in our preschool. And I guarantee you, I knew every clean men's restroom in Austin where I could change a diaper. And that was back before it was really, men were really doing that very much. I remember one time taking her to a playground, and there were some ladies pushing their children in swings, and our daughter's name is Lana, and we were in the middle, and I was pushing her. They were talking about recipes. Well, I was the cook at our house, so I just chimed in. And they looked at me like, who are you? And they grabbed their children and went off. That's how much times have changed. When I got through at UT, Dinah was offered a job at Baptist Hospital before it became Baptist St. Anthony's to do the dialysis unit. She was a dialysis nurse, which handles kidney failure. So they offered her a job, and I said, well, let's just move to the Panhandle. I've always wanted to live there anyway. And by the way, if I can go to WT, I'd like to go there and study history, because I really still couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. So I'd like to go study history, and if you'll let me do that, I'll become Mr. Mom. I'll do the cooking, the washing, the cleaning. When you come home, all you got to do is put your feet up, and I'll bring your supper to you. And she looked at me and she said, I'm not stupid. So that's kind of what we did. And I became Mr. Mom, and we moved to Canyon, and I enrolled in grad school. Also was thinking this time about writing a novel, and that really fascinated me. And so I enrolled in a course called the Institute of Children's Literature. That's what ICL means. And it was out of Connecticut. And back in those days, everything was done through the mail. There were no computers to do things online. And so this went back and forth, and that's where I learned the basics of writing a good story and how to write a novel. And if you're writing a novel and you've never actually taken a course in how to write a novel, I would encourage you to do that. Be careful, though. A lot of universities offer courses that don't really teach you how to write a novel. They just teach you creative writing. But if you can find one that teaches you commercial writing, that's what you want to do. And that's what Jody and I did the academy for at WT, was to teach commercial writing. As you can't see the bottom one, but I'll tell you what it says.
Glitter effect.
Yeah, the glitter effect. The one below ICL says underground tunnels. I walked around WT for exercise while we lived there, while I was a student. And we still live in Canyon. And I did that every day, and I was really fascinated with kind of the campus life, and the drainage tunnels really fascinated me. When you're a writer, everything does. And the guys on the maintenance crews, and I kind of got to know them. And about that time, ABC News came out with a piece that talked about how colleges were the hotbeds for bike theft. And I thought, what if I wrote a story about 2 boys that a middle grade novel, they come to visit a brother who's in college somewhere, and there's all these bikes being stolen, and they figure out they're transporting them through the underground tunnels to get them off campus. And so WT actually has some underground tunnels that aren't the drainage system. These are actual tunnels that go from building to building. UT has them, Tech has them, A&M has them. Sometimes they were built, UTs I think are the oldest. They were built in 1928. A&Ms were built sometime in the 30s, and they used them as places to go in case there was a bomb in World War II. I was told that the ones at WT were built for the Cold War, and that was a cool story, but they weren't. They were dug in the late 70s as a place to run steam power and electric power through. And I've talked to so many people now that have gone down in those tunnels. If you get caught down there, you get in big trouble. But for the book, I used the drainage tunnels. I didn't want kids trying to get down in these tunnels where they're not supposed to be. And so I wrote that book called The Glitter Effect, these 2 boys solving this mystery. And I started looking for an agent. How many of you have ever looked for an agent? It's almost impossible, isn't it? And so I started, and in fact, I even got scammed real bad the first time out. And so I started looking for an agent. And I was at a coffee shop in Amarillo one day. It's not there anymore. And I ran into a guy, and he was tearing pages out of a manuscript. He was tearing pages, computer pages apart. He was tearing the edges off. Remember that? And he had a stack about this thick.
Bruce Edwards.
Yes. How do you know this story?
He's a good friend of mine.
Oh, yes.
He's the only one I ever knew that sat in a coffee shop tearing edges off.
This is unbelievable. So that's great. Can't wait till Bruce said. So I said, you've got to be a writer. And he said, I am. And I said, I'm a writer. Sit down and have some coffee. So I did. He kept turning pages. And he said, what are you doing? I said, man, I'm trying to find an agent. He said, there's an agent right here in Amarillo. No way. He said, yeah, it's a Kirkland Literary Agency. And the lady who ran it was Jody Thomas's sister. Her name was Jean, but she never was Jody's agent. So he said, I'll take you over there and you can meet him if you want to. And I said, okay. So Bruce got in the most broken down car I've ever seen. And I followed him over there. It wasn't very far from Wilton Village, where this coffee place is called Coffee Beans and Machines, if you remember it. And so I followed him over there, and he introduced me to this lady named Dee Pace. Some of you may have known her, who was working at the front. Dee's no longer alive.
No.
And she said, okay, bring us a copy of your novel. That's back when everything was done through the mail or you took it yourself. And she said, come to this closet. So we went to this closet. She opened the door, and it was from here to that wall. And stacked up and down on one side, floor to ceiling, were manuscripts. Manuscripts, stacks and stacks and stacks. I bet you there were 500 in there. And she said, all right, your novel, when you bring it, it's going to go down here, way down here. So the agent has to get through all these before we get to yours. Now, if we have clients who bring in their stuff, they go to the front of the line. Wow. We'll get to you in about 6 months. So I was used to that, I was used to waiting sometimes a year to hear from an agent. So I said, okay. So they actually took my book, had me come in, and there I'm signing a contract and having a glass of champagne. And Jean, the agent, sent it out. 2 weeks later, she calls me on the phone. She says, Daniel Weiss and Sons in New York wants to buy your book. And they want a whole series. So she said, do you have a series? I said, well, how many do you want? She said, we need 4 more books. When do you need it by? I need it by this time tomorrow.
Oh!
So I went home, and I stayed up all night long, worked around the clock, came up with 4, it was a 5-book series, came up with 4 more titles, 4 more little descriptions, what we call blurbs.
Yeah.
Got in the car, and I hammered without any sleep, took it to Jean, and couldn't even email it back in those days. And got back home, and in my sleep-deprived condition, my wife was home from work, and I said, all right, we're going to be rich. That cruise we wanted to go on? Let's book it. She said, we don't have any money. And I said, we have a credit card. We'll pay it back. So we went on this great cruise to Cozumel. Had a fun time, put every bit of it on the credit card. Got back. I got a call from Jean. She said, I really hate to break it to you this way, but your book made it all the way through the whole publishing committee. Because when you send a book in, usually 2 editors have to like it. And then they have to meet with the whole publishing committee and prove to them why this book will sell. And it will go through everything. And usually the last person besides the publisher himself or herself is the marketing department. And that's the final obstacle. And she said, your book got to the marketing department, and the marketing department said, books for this age group with male protagonists are not selling right now. Ask him to write something like The Babysitter's Club, which isn't in me. That's how long ago that was. So they kicked it all out. I learned a very valuable lesson that day. don't count your chickens, how many other cliches can we use? So meanwhile, Jean called me again in a couple of weeks, and she said, do you think you could write a young adult romance about Texas? Avon is looking for young adult romances about Texas. And I said, you bet I can write one. When do they need it? She said, in 3 months. So I worked again almost around the clock writing this young adult romance that I called Windswept Promise, which I'll talk more about in a minute. She sent it in. I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, so I'm working on the novel. I had written this, I'm going to back up just a couple of years, or 3 or 4 years. I'd written the article that was read about in my introduction that was published in the Panhandle Plains Historical Review. There it is right there. I took that information, this is how I wrote this novel, I took that information, turned the information I got, because I'd already done the research, into a young adult romance novel about the XIT Ranch. And so it was about Texas. So I used that to my benefit, and Jean sent it in. They called her back a few days later, because this was through the mail, of course, and they said, we love this book. This guy's a great writer, but you know what? We filled our quota last week. So now I have 2 novels in the file cabinet. Shortly after that, Jean retired. I thought, what am I going to do? So I put together a collection of songs I've been working on and things, and our daughter was in elementary school by this time. And I went around to the schools and I did a program about Texas, and just to try to do something to make a little money. And that went okay. And then I thought, you know, this is going so well, maybe I should go to the Amarillo Theater and see if they want to do my show about the quarter horse. They did. And I had to submit it. They had to approve it, but they did. And I went out to the American Quarter Horse Association, and let me tell you, work every angle when you're doing this kind of stuff. I thought maybe they'll underwrite it. They did. I knew a woman in the Junior Service League. I said, maybe they'd like a project, and they'd underwrite it. They did. So you can see both their names are on there. The American Quarter Horse Association even did a booklet, and this was a coloring book, and it had a crossword puzzle in it, and they bust in, get this, every school child in a certain age range went to the Amarillo Theater to see this show back in 1996, and they all got one of these coloring books. So I thought, you know, I've really hit the big time now. I'm on my way to the big time. And then I meet these guys who were on the Lawrence Welk show. How many of you know that remember Lawrence Welk are your grandparents? Parents and grandparents. Roger and David Otwell became 2 of my best friends. We started writing songs together, and one day they said, would you write us a Branson show? And I said, can you do that? And I said, of course I can do that. So I put a show together, and the idea was for people to come to Amarillo, go to see in the summer, go see Texas one night out in the heat, come into the cool the next night, and see a completely different show about Texas. And so that's what I wrote, and we put this together, and we ran it the summers of 1998 and 1999. It was a pretty big hit. We got written up in the paper about it. Yeah, that says 98 right there. And I was even in the show. I played a cowboy who kind of led the audience. They insisted I be in it. And so, what acting have you done? Well, I was Peter Rabbit. Anyway. I was able to pull a little more acting out of my hat, and really enjoyed being in it. We always had a guest star that came, and we had several guest stars throughout the run of the show. But I wrote Oprah's story down there for this reason. When my children's play was going on, that's when Oprah came to town for the beef trials. And so, she did her show from Amarillo Theater, if you remember. And actually my show, I can't believe they pushed me back because of this. my children's show was postponed because Oprah was in town, and they had to do it later. So this was like 3 years later, probably 3 or 4 years later. We're doing this show at Amarillo Theater. Out on the marquee is Can't Get Enough of Texas by Tim Lewis. And so I'm there on opening day. We're having great ticket sales. It's about midday. I've driven in Amarillo to see how the ticket sales were doing. And I look out front, and right by the marquee with my name on it is this car with Ohio license plates. And I ran out the door and I said, hey y'all, welcome to Texas. We're so glad you're here. We're so thrilled you're here to see the show. And these people looked at me like I was from Mars. And they said, we don't know anything about any show. We just wanted to see where Oprah was. So if you ever start thinking you're a big shot, you'll be knocked down pretty fast. I learned so much from these guys. I learned how to smile. I learned stage presence. And later on the Welk Show, in its heyday, the Welk Show, if you don't know about it, was filmed in Hollywood, and it went out to 50 million American television sets every Saturday night. So it was a big deal back in this day. When I finished that gig, I got together with some guys in the band because I loved Sinatra, his music, and that sort of jazz. And I did a show with these guys. I was the singer called Salute to Sinatra, and there's a show we did locally at the Continental. And then the pianist and I got together, and I also love Broadway, and I thought, well, I need to do a Broadway show. So we got together, and we did a Broadway review, and it's called Welcome to Broadway. And we took that around and did that. So I had all these things going. And I know talking to some of you before we started today, a lot of you have a lot of things going. And that's good. Get yourself out there in as many ways as you can. Still, I didn't know really how I was going to end up my career. I still don't. One night a friend came to dinner, and he had been, he was going around the country doing talks for being booked by this group called the Associated Clubs out of Topeka, Kansas. And what they did was they booked speakers into knife and fork clubs and executive dinner clubs. Now, Amarillo used to have a knife and fork club. They were big deals. Everybody, the men put on tuxes and the women put on gowns, and a lot of them, Amarillo's was that way. And they would go and hear entertainment or something interesting. And the executive dinner clubs were the same way. So I took the show, Can't Get Enough of Texas, that I had written, so it was mine. I turned it into a one-man show called Standing in the Stirrups, because I heard a cowboy say one day, he said, man, I'm tired. We've been standing in the stirrups all day. What that means is you're working cattle or whatever you do. And I thought, that's a catchy title. So I used that title, and I had done this show, and I did it all over the country, but I had done a performance in some town, mid-sized town in Kansas, about 500 people in the audience. And so the next morning I was at the hotel, and I was kind of used to this. People would come up the next day and they'd have their program and want me to sign it. And so I saw this lady headed to my table, and she was holding what I thought was her program. So I got my pen out, and she came up to me and she plunks this thing on the table, and it's not the program, it's the menu, and she says, somebody as old as you needs to order the senior plate. Oh. I was 45 years old, or maybe 48, but I wasn't even 50 yet. So once again, don't ever think you're hot. I did several shows with Associated Clubs. I did do a Broadway show with them. It was one man. I'd take the music. And this is a playbill for the season for this Knife and Fork Club in Victoria, Texas. You can see I'm on that. I injured my voice. I was using my voice so much that I injured it, and I got to where I couldn't really sing very well anymore. And so I had this tour planned at the Southeast, and I called the guy at Associated Clubs, whose name, by the way, was Ben Franklin. Called Ben, and I said, Ben, I've hurt my voice. I don't know if I can do this tour at the Southeast. He said, well, write another show. Write one where you don't have to sing. And so I did. I wrote one called Romancing the Funny Bone, The Lighter Side of Love. And that was a total just speaking show, and I used a lot of funny things, and it went over pretty well. Got back after that. Ben Franklin had some health problems, and Associated Clubs fizzled shortly after that. And I thought, well, now what am I going to do? And I was at the coffee shop in Canyon one day, Stomping Grounds, if anybody remembers that, and the guy there said, would you write us a Christmas show? And I said, I'd like to do a Christmas show here. And I said, well, yeah, I'll do that. And I'll call in some of my buddies. So I called the Otwells and some other people. And we did a Christmas show. Well, about 8 months later, maybe 9, I was at the Texas office on the square in Canyon. And the guy there said, do you have a Christmas show? We would like to hire you to direct some college students, write some shows for them, direct them, take them around. do some smaller shows to advertise the big show we do in the summer. Do you have a Christmas show? And I really didn't. I mean, this was just throwing some things together. And I said, of course I have a Christmas show. And there it is. I called it the Panhandle Christmas. This one we did at the Fair Theater. This was a bill for the Fair Theater with these kids I was working with, and we got the Texas Commission on the Arts to fund it. And this is just another playbill from that same show. But I did that for several years with the Texas organization. And then in 2004, they changed, there was a period where they didn't do the Texas show they have now. And when they started with the 2003, 4, and 5, they did a different show called Texas Legacies. And in 2004, they brought in this big director from New York. And, he wanted to get a whole new cast. So they asked me if I would. They said, he wants you to try out for the lead part. And I said, look, I was in Peter Rabbit. He wants you to try out. So I did. And actually, that's got the lead. Played the lead that summer. And I want to tell you, that was the hardest job I've ever had, because we did the show 6 nights a week. We did 2 shows over the 4th of July week. We did the regular show, then we did another shorter show. That's me in my top coat. I'm 50 years old here now. I hated that beard. And that's me with Paul Parker, and there I am. And you've probably seen this set. They still use this set. And I want you to know there's bats that fly out of this set. They still do. But there we are at the end, and it was quite an experience. But that's when I learned, man, I'm not an actor. I'm a writer. And I like being a writer. I don't want to be an actor. So when that show was over, there's a hiking trail you can take that ends up at the top of the cliff there where the horse rides across. And I love hiking up there and sitting on that rock. And I was looking down at the theater, and I thought, okay, it's time to write another novel. And I had made a perfect discovery a few years before that, and here's what it was. I had a great aunt and uncle who had both passed away, and I went to their estate sale. My brother was running it. And I came across a collection of postcards that no one knew existed. And my great uncle had written his wife, my great aunt, a postcard with a loved one on the back every Friday for 60 years, and no one knew it was a secret. And I thought, wow, is that not a hook for a love story? In fact, Betty, hold that book up. Betty had one for me to sign today. This was my big break in the novels, and it was published by Random House. And then Random House published it all over the world, and they got the Reader's Digest deal. And it would have even been bigger. They thought it was going to be as big as The Notebook. But at the last minute, I got a lukewarm review from Publishers Weekly. And they told me, they said, Random House said, look, because mine's kind of inspirational, but it's mainstream. And they said, Publishers Weekly, okay, there's 8 people who write reviews. There's one man that we don't want to get because he's not going to like it. The rest of them, it'll be like The Notebook. Well, guess who I got? The one man. And so the sales didn't do quite what they thought they were going to be. So during that time, Jody Thomas called, and she said, I mentioned this already, I'd like for you to teach for the Writers Academy. And I said, no, Jody, I haven't published a novel yet. Well, you know how to teach writing? You took the course, so I did. We started in 2009, and we went for 12 years. This was a bill from 2014. And then I got a call one day. So I was doing that. Then I got a call one day, and this woman said, "What do you know about drag racing?" And I said, "Well, what I did in high school out on the highway, weren't supposed to be doing." And she said, "There's a professional drag racer who wants a book written. And have you ever thought about ghostwriting?" And I said, "Does it pay well?" "Yeah, it can." And she said, "We want you to write his book." And so I did. This isn't him. His name wasn't Wyatt. Now, I can't tell you. All I can tell you is he drove a nitro funny car. That's what this is. These are nitroglycerin powered cars, and they go from 0 to over 300 miles an hour in 4 seconds. It's the most amazing thing you've ever seen. And when you're 200 yards away, your bones in your chest rattle. This guy flew me all over he was so busy, and he owned another business besides. He was so busy. The only time I could interview him was when he was flying from one race to the other. So, dang it, I had to fly around in a private jet and interview him. So, it's a ghost book. I can't tell you the title of it. I can't tell you who he is, but I can tell you I did do it, and it was a lot of fun. Now, I did another ghost book that I can tell you about. This one was about a ranch. That, guess where it was? On the old XIT ranch. So I knew a lot about it already. I could draw from that. And this family included me in the inside cover. Now it says Jack Shelton on the front. Sorry, the picture's blurry. But he didn't write it, I did. And he actually says this book is written by Tim Lewis on the inside. So finally, Random House did publish Forever Friday. And like I said, it's in 8 languages. And how am I doing?
You're good.
Okay, 8 languages, cover almost through. 8 languages. And I got a call right after COVID from a screenwriter in LA. And she said, you don't know me, but I'm a screenwriter. And your book, Forever Friday, was my favorite read during COVID. Have you ever thought about having a screenplay? And I said, every single day. She said, well, I'd like to write it. And I said, well, the trouble is I don't have any money to pay a screenwriter. Would you be willing to do it on a commission? And she said, absolutely. So we made a deal. Her husband just happened to be a lawyer. He wrote up a contract, and it was a fair contract. And so she and I worked on. The cool thing was I had so many notes I kept from Forever Friday. I write tons of notes. I outline things. I always know what I'm going to write about. I plan it. And I'm just, I know some people write off the cuff. I just can't hardly do it that way. But so what I did was she said I saved her a whole year's worth of work with everything I gave her. And so she wrote the screenplay, and we ended up sending it to Lionsgate, wanted to look at it. And Lionsgate had it for 6 months. And then about a month ago, they finally passed on it and said, it's not exactly what we want, but we want to see your next project. And so, actually, I've just told this part of the secret. Oh, well, can't tell anybody. So I thought, okay, I need to write another screenplay. I'll talk about that in a minute. Remember the book about the glitter effect that was in the file cabinet? I got it out about 5 years ago. Redid it. I mean, I had to redo everything. Times changed that much. And you know, we're cell phones now, and things have changed. And so I got that back out. Found another publisher in Plymouth, Massachusetts called Elk Lake Publishing, and they're a traditional publisher. They do things a little bit differently. Instead of paying an advance royalty, they give a much higher percentage that you make from the book sales. And they mainly work through Amazon. But nobody else really wanted it, so I went with them, and they turned out to be a great publisher. My daughter, who read this book as a child, or the first draft of it, grew up and became a graphic artist and did the cover for this book. And she had to audition to do the cover. She also did the cover for this book. Now, remember when I showed you the University of Texas Tower? Two of the things, and I wanted to do something set in the 1960s, and two of the things I remember most about Texas in the 60s were, number one, the JFK assassination, and how many of you remember the UT Tower shooting 3 years later? That was the first mass school shooting, and I remember in 1966, I was in the 6th grade, and we just couldn't believe someone would do that. The whole nation was in shock. There'd never been anything like that before. So I took characters who were the woman who sees JFK get shot was standing right there on the curb and sees it. The man who at UT, his fiance was killed, and he's a star on Broadway. I know some things about Broadway. I put together the things in my life that I know, and I put it together in this story called Running Downwind. And there's another character who was a bank robber in the Dust Bowl days. He's part of the book. And it's a very complicated story. It's all about transformation and redemption. And so I started sending this out to, by this time my second agent, I'd parted ways with her. She She just couldn't sell my things. In fact, she didn't even sell it for her Friday. I did. I sold it at a conference. So I parted ways with her, and I was contacting agents. I was contacting editors, and I want you to know, before Elk Lake picked up this book and published it, this is true, it was turned down over 200 times. And I just kept after it. I knew it was a good story. I knew it was different. I knew it didn't follow any formula. I just believed in it. And so now, I can't tell you this man's name, but there's a screenwriter out there who contacted me last Thursday, a different one. And he said, if Lionsgate will option this book, I want to write the screenplay for it. This man has written screenplays for some of the blockbuster movies that we all know and have seen. I've been floating on the cloud since last Thursday. So I took that email and I forwarded it to my contact at Lionsgate, and I said, okay, what do you think about this? And he emailed me back and he said, can you get us a book here ASAP? So that's where we are on that.
Awesome.
The last book I published was Sweat Promise. Dug it out of the file cabinet. We redid it. Elk Lake published it. Here's the odd thing about this book. It came out on Valentine's Day. And, it did okay as a new release. And, Elk Lake didn't have a presence that Random House did. But it did okay. And I'm talking about on Amazon. And then Tuesday, 2 weeks ago, the night the big prairie fires hit, and this book ends in a big prairie fire. I was watching the news, and I was so depressed about all the prairie fires, and I thought, I'm going to look on Amazon, see what my ranking is. And I looked, and it was number one. It stayed number one in the category. It stayed number one in the category of teen and young adult westerns until today. And I think it's no longer, I think the reason is it's no longer a new release, because I couldn't find it today. It was number one for 18 days.
Wow.
So, all right. An undeniable truth. The author who benefits you most is not the one who tells you something you did not know, but the one who gives expression to the truth that has been struggling in you for utterance. Isn't that beautiful? And that was by Oswald Chambers. You know about Oswald Chambers. So a few closing nuggets. Befriend other writers. You're doing that today. Great. Attend conferences. You're kind of doing that today. Take a writing course if you need to. Write your first sentence, then your second, and then keep going. And, everybody says write a little every day. You can't really do that. So I put it up here. But at least think about your novel or your children's book or your poem or your screenplay every day. Read up. I can't talk about that as being more important. And what I mean by that is read in the genre you're writing in and read people who are better than you. Read up. Don't read down. That will not help you. Read up. Practice patience. It's kind of like nailing Jello to a wall. How do you practice patience? You just live through it. You just go through it and you have faith in yourself. Capitalize on every writing opportunity. That's been my life. Sometimes it was hard. And let me tell you, I'll reach out to people sometimes and I'll think, man, I feel silly doing that. But it's paid off several times. And then believe in yourself and never give up. And then one final closing thought. This is by a guy named Tim Keller, one of my favorite nonfiction authors. This is his definition of work. Work is rearranging the raw materials of God's creation in a way that everyone flourishes. Isn't that beautiful? Take these things that are inside of you, rearrange them, and let everybody benefit for it. Now, I brought some bookmarks today. I'm out of the new bookmarks, and what I do instead of handing out business cards, I think some of you do this, is hand out bookmarks. It tells a little bit about me and whatever book I'm pushing. And so I have one that I'm going to set up here on the table if you'd like one. Just come get them, or a couple. My daughter designs these for me through a company called smartpress.com, and I think you could probably design your own. But it's so beneficial, and people say, what do you write? And I just hand them a bookmark. Because, we'll be standing in line at the coffee shop. I've done this countless times, and there'll be usually a woman. I have to say women read more than men do. And we'll be standing in line for coffee, and I'll look at her and I'll go, you look like a reader. And she'll go, I am. How did you know that? And I'll say, I'm a writer. I know. And my wife is going, are you going to stop doing that? No, I'm not. And I give these out to people at the bank. I hand them out to go through line to get food. Say, hey, you need to read my newest novel. Promote. Because let me tell you, your publisher's not going to. Not even Random House is going to, unless you're Stephen. So promote. All right. Questions? I finally got there.
Where can we get your books?
You can get my books on Amazon. That's the best place. There's a great new place outside Paladura Canyon, right for the entrance, called the Sad Monkey Mercantile. How many of you have been there, anybody? Great place. Coffee bar, food trucks, cool camping stuff. We just go out there and hang out. They have an event center. They have weddings in it. They had a comedy club the other night. They sell my books. Now, why am I telling you not to go to Barnes & Noble? Barnes & Noble will order it for you, and sometimes they'll have them on the shelf. But the way my publisher works, and this is changing, so hear me on this. Amazon, whether we like it or not, is becoming the big bookseller. My publisher, who's now my publisher, Elf Lake, publishes through Amazon. Amazon prints all my books. And so I can buy them from her for a certain price, a very reduced price, and sell them myself if I want to. I don't usually like to sell my own books anymore. I've kind of gotten away from doing that. It's just a lot of paperwork, and you don't make really very much. But I've done that for a long time. So the best thing you can do where I get the best benefit is buy it through Amazon. The second best thing is go out to the Sad Monkey, because I made a deal with them. And bookstores, I make really almost nothing at bookstores. So I've kind of shied away from those. And I love bookstores. I wish Barnes & Noble had mine on every rack, but it's just not the way it works. So just be mindful of that. That's the way publishing is going right now. Our beautiful bookstore in Canyon, Burley now, where
Dallas Bell.
Yeah, Dallas Bell sells a lot of local authors' books. I just waited and I told her, I said, you can order some if you want to, but, I'm telling people to go to Amazon and here. Anyway, it's a conundrum right now, the way the book world is going. So, all right, questions? Anybody? Did I do that good a job?
So do you have a time when you try to write, or some set of determinant that said, I'm sitting down and I'm writing
I do.
today? You share any of that?
Even though our daughter's grown and long gone and married, I'm still Mr. Mom, sort of. I still do the cooking, and we share the house chores now, but my wife still works. So when I push her out the door with her lunch and her breakfast, I clean up the dishes and I go to my office. And I try to write from 8 until noon. It's my writing time. Then I have lunch, and then the afternoon I use for the business of writing. Now, one of my favorite expressions, and I've said it today many times to various people, is life gets in the way of life. And man, does it get in the way of life for writers. Here's why. People who know you're a writer, his time is her own, her time is her own. They don't have a real job. So, they can do this or they can do that. And most of the time we will, because we're just good people. Mm-hmm. But you have to find a happy medium. And so everybody knows I write from 8 to noon. Try not to call me during that time. I will answer the phone. And I do check emails. I just can't help it. I shouldn't, but I do. And I will look on Amazon, see what my rankings are. Just can't help it, but I do. And I will answer an email from a screenwriter. So, but I try to do that, and then the business in the afternoon. And then I have the evenings I try to have those open to spend my life. I'm a morning person, and I love the morning. And I was never good about writing at night. Jody and I are good friends. She's just the opposite. She loves to write at midnight. Man, I'm asleep at midnight. So, yes.
Thinking of the business of writing, and you can disclose as little or as much as you're comfortable with, but how do you feel about your income streams with all of the work that you've put out? How well do you feel like you're being supported by that?
You mean, am I making?
Are you making enough?
What I've learned is this: you go through periods where you'll make a good bit, and royalties are funny things. You'll make a lot when the book first comes out, and then after it's been out for a while, sales will drop, and you won't make as much, unless it becomes very popular. Playwriting royalties are very little, and you have to be, in New York really to support yourself as a playwright. Songwriting is a whole different ballgame. I'd love to write a hit song, and I've marketed some in Nashville before. None of them have hit. Michael Martin Murphy asked my buddies and I to write a song for him one day, and we did, and he didn't like it. So we used it in the show, and it was a hit of the show. But yeah, it fluctuates. What I tell my writing students when I do teach writing is if you really want to make it as a writer, marry a nurse.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that. The old cliche, don't quit your day job. Don't do that. Until Jody used to tell me, don't quit your day job till you publish 5 books. So I can't even quit my day job yet. Oh, I do have one more cool thing that happened, and I signed a disclosure on this, but I will tell you this much. So my cowboy poetry, I had a lot of fun with it. I thought about making a collection of it and publishing it. And I have a Christmas poem I did, and I got approached recently by a publisher in Dallas who wants to turn it into a children's book and then a video, an animated feature. So we'll see. That's in the works too. So yeah, things happen. They just don't happen fast. So did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any others?
I have one other.
Okay.
So how I know that this is related to networking, meeting writers, etc., but it seems like you're often approached for work. How has that happened for you, where you've got your name out enough that people are coming to you and asking you to make the that they want written?
It happens because of what we just talked about. That's why it's so important to network.
Yeah, okay.
And I guarantee you the second screenplay offer happened because the first one did, and that word got out. And it's a very tight community in the screenwriting world, and they kind of all know each other, I think. So word gets around, and it's almost impossible to get an agent, but then it's almost impossible to get published without one. It's just the whole thing. You just have to keep going at it. And when I teach a class on writing query letters, those things evolve and change. And so when you first write a query letter, if you're looking for an agent that way, or a publisher, get it back. If you're lucky enough to have them respond, make changes if you agree with it. Read other people's query letters who have posted them online, and a lot of people will do that. And see what works. And a lot of agents and editors who say, well, we only want 3 paragraphs and that's it. Well, not really. The ones I had luck with were longer than that. And I got to where I would write my passion for writing the book in there. That would be its own paragraph. Now, you do have to follow the rules. the publishing world is so strict on the rules. Don't send colored paper and don't send them chocolate and all that. Don't do that. But keep at it. Let that letter evolve and change, and just don't be afraid to send it out. 200 times, come on. It was almost embarrassing to send it out again, but it's so easy with email. Back in the days when it was all through the mail, it was expensive. But now email doesn't cost anything. And none of them take it through the mail anymore. It's all email now. So,
Whenever you were doing that, did you do the thing where you waited a certain amount of time for responses, or did you just send them out back to back?
it depended. I would send them out back to back at first, and then occasionally somebody would want a, what's the word?
Excerpt? Or
No, they would want a, all I can think of is exquisite. That's not
a synopsis?
exclusive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they want an exclusive. And so I would say, well, right now it's out to so-and-so and so-and-so, or it's out to 3 people. When I get those back, if I do, then I will grant you a 30-day exclusive. And that happened to me. In fact, the one I think my idea got stolen, that was an exclusive. And this agent turned it down, and then a year later, I get a call from a friend and said, "Did you publish your book?" "No, I think I just saw it."
So what do you think were there any tip-offs that person was going to rip you off? I mean, what, are there any tips that you could, to be careful?
I would say send your stuff out to reputable agents, and I did. This was a reputable agent. And I called an entertainment attorney and I said, "What can I do?" And he said, "Nothing." He said, "It's in that gray area of whether they really stole your idea or not." And he said, "If you try to fight this, number one, it'll cost you a lot of money, and number two, your name will be ruined. You won't be able to submit to anybody. They'll be afraid of you." So I just let it go. And the way it came out is the book that was like mine didn't do very well. Mine was Forever Friday, and it did great. So that's the idea that the person did. It was almost the same scenario.
Well, that's why a lot of published writers say, don't worry about having your idea stolen, because even if they steal your idea, they're not going to do as good a job as you, or make it the same way that you would have.
You know, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. I would still send it out.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get to where you could freak out so much you'd never send it out. You just have to trust that, if you're a person of faith, just trust God. He's going to take care of it. That's what I do. So, anybody else?
Well, if you live in Canyon, sir, we hope we will see you in our fellowship more often.
I'll come when I can. Saturdays are really busy days for me, and I do some traveling, but thank you. Was there another question?
I just wondered, like query letters and not getting an agent and all that, and isn't that somewhat old school stuff, or do you have to still jump through all those hoops?
You have to jump through the hoops.
I don't like jumping through hoops.
Although you said you sold one book directly to the publisher without an agent.
Yes, I don't have an agent anymore. I learned what I needed to from the 2 agents I had. I learned about contracts. And when I contacted Elk Lake, they were taking queries. They weren't just taking agent inquiries, and so I sent them one. And I don't have to pay that 15% to an agent, which is wonderful. So,
Did you just find them online, or?
sort of. Had someone tip me off, but you can look them up. Elk Lake Publishing in Plymouth, Mass.
Publishers Weekly.
Yep. Yes. Oh, I spent lots of money on Publishers Weekly through the years. You can go to Publishers Weekly and spend a little money and find out what different agents publish. And, the best thing to do, I know you know this, go to the bookstore, get you a latte, go through the stacks, find books like yours and go to the acknowledgments and see who thanks what agent. That's a good way to do it.
If you haven't read an acknowledgement in the back of a book recently, there are some that are super entertaining too now.
It's just, just stay at it, be creative, believe in yourself. I could have given up years ago and never done anything, and I just couldn't let myself do that. So I wish I could tell you it was an easy career, but I wouldn't be telling you the truth. It's tough. And even people who make it big time, there's the pressure of is my next book going to be as good as my last one? So now here's another thing. Some people will tell you, you need to be branded. You need to brand yourself. And that works. You write one certain kind of book, and so you write all the rest of them the same way. I never wanted to be branded. I wanted to write different subjects, different genres for different age groups. I would have probably, if I had done every book the same, I would have probably done better, but I just didn't want to do that. To me, it was more about the quality of living a writing life rather than money. And so, there are years now that I couldn't make enough to sustain myself. It just depends on what I have going on. So it was great for my wife's income to be there all this time. And she's going to retire in 2.5 years. I tell people I'm going to retire when they pull the pin from my cold dead hand.
Right.
So, would I love a movie deal? Absolutely, I love a movie deal. But I've also learned that it's not, instant $1 million either. It's, do you know how a movie deal works? You want me to tell you? Do you know already? They'll, if a movie company wants it, they'll do what's called an auction. And they'll pay you, essentially what they'll do is they'll pay you some money so you'll take it off the market. And usually an auction is for a year. And that gives them a year to look at it, decide if they want to do it as a movie or not. And you get to keep the money. And then at the end of the year, they can either decide to do it and then pay you a bunch more money, or say, no, it's not for us, and then you put it back on the market
They're
again.
gonna do a rerun, like Ghostbusters, anything that's ever made any money before, they're gonna bring it back. They're not gonna do much that's new.
So it's hard to break in. I had
Color purple.
I had a guy at a movie company tell me not long ago, and he said, I said, man, I was thanking him for being so upfront with me. And he said, this business is opaque for a reason. He said, the movie industry makes it hard for people to get their foot in the door. Well, so do publishers, don't they? I mean, that's hard too. It's all hard. You just have to be creative, figure out back doors to go into, different ways. So just nothing illegal, but keep your options open. Just keep writing. Write for the joy of writing. Write for the joy of having your family read. People will tell me, well, I don't read my own stuff. And I go, you don't? I love reading my own stuff. I mean, I worked hard on that novel. I don't read it all the time, but after a couple of years, I'll probably read Forever Friday again because I'll forget half of what's in there. So I love that story. Anybody else? Well, it's been a pleasure to be here today. I hope I inspired you. I thought maybe since we had such a broad scope of different writers, I thought this was better than maybe doing a lesson on how to write a query letter. So, because how's that going to help, an artist or somebody else? So, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and hats off to all of you.
We hope to see you.